of Hatria. My life in Israel also began through Bnei Akiva, Hakshara, Kibbutz Lavi, and then I went to university to study social work. And then I was fortunate to serve in the army as well. I served for 2.5 years as a mental health officer. And that's when I met my husband, Stevie, who was camps organizer about 100 years ago. We set up our family home here in Kibbutz Alumim with 4 children, 3 grandchildren. And I continued in my work as a social worker and became a therapist, specializing now in trauma therapy. And as mentioned, I'm in charge of the clinic that we have. We have what's called resilience centers. There are a few resilience centers set up in our area. And the whole purpose of the resilience centers is to really help people constantly cope with the complicated security situation, which, as you know, has been going on for many, many, many years. In fact, the resilience centers they were set up initially in the second Lebanon War, when the Katyusha rockets came over and the hospitals were inundated with people suffering from major anxiety attacks. And some very sensible people then came along and said, wait, they shouldn't have to go to hospitals. It's not necessarily something that they need medical advice. These are normal reactions to a non-normal situation. Following that, resilience centers have been set up there, and now throughout this area, going down, the newest one that's been set up is in Ofakim. And our job is to help people cope, and also we've had to prepare them for what we would anticipate to be the rocket attacks or the balloons and kites that have been coming over the last few years. I have to say there was no way in our minds that we had any idea that what happened on the 7th of October could possibly happen. Maybe we talked in terms of 1 terrorist, 2 terrorists coming in, how would we deal with it, what would that mean, but not what we saw on the 7th. For us, so with me, the story starts on the 6th of October, which is actually my birthday. So my family were visiting, they came to stay. That's my married daughter with her husband and 2 babies, and my married son and his wife. And my other son was also on kibbutz in his house where he lives. And 6:33 in the morning, the alarm sounded, and we knew right from the beginning that something was very different this time. We're used to hearing the alarms. I would say actually we're used to hearing the click even of the Iron Dome, which is situated just behind our kibbutz. Oh, I don't know if we mentioned, but our kibbutz is 2.5 kilometers, am I right? About 3 kilometers from Gaza. We can walk to Gaza, we see Gaza. In the past, we had workers here from Gaza. So at 6:33 in the morning, the alarms were sounding, and they started and stopped very, very quickly. Tseva Adom, Adom, Tseva. It was very, very clear that something was extremely chaotic. 6:35, a rocket hit our kibbutz already. And then I would say by 6:40 or 6:45, we were receiving messages to tell us to lock ourselves in our houses, to go into our safe rooms, to lock ourselves in our rooms, which we now know you can't actually lock those doors. They're very, very heavy rooms. There's a lot of things that we've discovered now that we didn't know then, but then we thought we'd be 100% safe in our safe rooms. We now know today that those doors, that you can shoot through them. And we were told also to stay quiet, which, as you can imagine, with babies in the room is not an easy task. But my daughter, who is my absolute heroine today, she set about straight away making sure that her kids were okay. And we started functioning within the room, which for us meant my son-in-law, he had his hand on his gun and the other hand was on the handle of the door. I think really he was the first one that really understood what was happening. Stevie was on the phone with the Thailandi and Nepalese workers who work with him in the dairy farm. And as I say, my other children were taking care of their kids. And I run the hotline for the area. So I was already getting phone calls from people, A, asking what was going on, be with already suffering from anxiety. And one of the first messages I received at 7:15 in the morning was from my friend Mira, who is from my team, my therapy team. She lives in Kfar Aza, and she sent me a message saying, "Oh my God, Esther, all hell's broken loose, but I'm available if you need me." And I did start referring people to her. She didn't respond, and I just had to move on and find somebody else who was available. And the following day, I learned already that by 7:40, terrorists had come into her house and shot her. She was by herself at home with her dogs. She was on the phone with her sisters. They heard her say Shema Yisrael, and then they heard her be shot. So with us, at 7 o'clock in the morning, the first set of terrorists, the first group of terrorists, came into our kibbutz through the back gate, which is closest to Gaza. They killed 2 or 3 of the Thailandi workers. The Thailandi workers, they live just close to the dairy farm. They killed them, and then there's a little bit of speculation because we know that they had in their pockets notification that they should destroy as much as possible, kill as many people as possible, kidnap as many people as possible. But they didn't actually come towards the houses. The speculation is that they realized that the people from the Nova party were escaping on the main road, road number 232, which has now been called Death Road, which is just lovely. And we're the last kibbutz on that road. So they recognized the fact that they were able to kill more of these, more victims from the Nova party who were trying to escape. So they drove straight to the front gate. A battle then took place. We have film footage, which is really awful to see, where they shoot the Nova survivors who'd managed to get as far as our front gate. And some just incredible people. The whole day really was all about incredible people, as it has been since then as well. Some young guys turned up. I think they were from Golani unit, but they weren't necessarily in uniform. There was a policeman as well, and a small battle takes place. This is now 7:10 in the morning. One of their terrorists, who we thought was their officer, is shot. And then a miracle, maybe call it a miracle, maybe call it luck, I don't know, fate, I don't know. For some reason, they leave the front gate and they go back out from the same way that they came. And that's them gone. At exactly the same time that they're leaving the kibbutz, our group of first responders have now reached the armory, and that's where they pick up their guns. Now, a couple of them have their guns at home, but it's not such a simple situation. Maybe 1 or 2 of them have pistols at home, but in this kind of situation, they need much better military equipment. So the larger guns are kept in the armory, and they were able to get the guns. And I say that because in Kfar Aza, the terrorists were already waiting for the first responders. So when the first responders got to the armory, the terrorists wiped them out there. Again, luck, miracle, just how it went. So our first responders were then able to get to the gate, by which stage a couple of more, again, individual good people who had just jumped in their car to come and join us. Another group of terrorists come into the kibbutz. This time, as Sarah Jane mentioned, they kidnap 2 of the Nepalese and Thailandi workers and murder a further 18. So 22 have been murdered altogether. One was able to escape and he hid himself in between the cows. Another one, the one who worked with Stevie in the effort, he hid himself in the ceiling because he works there. He knew how to manage it. But Stevie's receiving phone calls from them, what to do. He's telling them to go to the safe room because he thinks that's the safest thing. But the terrorists threw grenades in and shot, and it was all about doing as much damage as possible. They destroyed all the electricity in the air in that area. They shot through the large milk tank. It wasn't just about doing damage on that day, it was about doing long-term damage. We later discovered that they destroyed all the taps, all the irrigation in the fields as well. It was really about destroying a land flowing with milk and honey, that could not happen. While our first responders had gotten to the Nepalese and Thailandi workers and obviously realized that they needed help, one of our team, a man called Amichai, he then spotted another group of terrorists coming into the kibbutz further down the fence, cutting across. We have avocado groves, and literally saw them running to his house, which is another really important factor to take into consideration. That we're talking about men, most of them aged from 25 up. But the training they've done has been training in the field, and they've trained as soldiers. You're trained to fight a battle. You're not trained necessarily to fight in your back garden. Obviously, there have been much more training ever since. And they had some kind of training, but again, not to this extent that so many terrorists would come in one go. When Amichai saw terrorists running towards his house, he shot into the air to draw attention from them, and he succeeded. They shot at him. He was injured across the chest. He managed to slide down underneath a car. His gun jammed in the process, and he thought that was it, that was the end. But fortunately, other members of the first response team managed to get to him. They managed to carry him to safety into a nurse's house, a woman who's actually a midwife, a woman by the name of Michaela, who again, luck, miracle, fate, happened to have the right type of medical equipment in her home to be able to help him. She also noticed that Iran, who brought him into the house, was bleeding. He'd been shot 3 times in the leg. And she said to Iran, wait, let me take care of you. And he's, nope, I've got to get out there, and didn't think twice. He's back out there. And again, I'm talking about men who are all fathers, 5, 6, 7 children, which is a huge factor as well for us, for people like Sarah Jane and myself, to know that there are people here who are literally prepared to put their life on the line for all of us. It's a very humbling emotion. We, as well as having the first responder team in the field, we have 3 gentlemen who are in what's called our special secure room, which is in a shelter. It's underground, and we have cameras around the kibbutz. And these 3 men were looking at the screens the whole time, so they could see where the terrorists were going, and they could get messages to the first responders. And a battle takes place. And ironically, it takes place we have here in kibbutz Gan Hadar, which is named for Hadar Goldin, who 2014, prior to Tzuk Eitan, he was engaged, and he and his fiance had arranged to have their Shabbat Chatan on our kibbutz, because we have guest rooms and it's a beautiful kibbutz and a lovely place to be. But of course, what happened to him 2014 happened. And since then, we've kept very good contact with the family, and we have established a special garden here, which is based on his characteristics and what he believed in. And it's kind of ironic that that's where a large part of the battle with the terrorists took place. And all the time, our first responders are pushing back, and they had a slight upper hand because it was slightly higher land than where they came in. It was, again, fortunate, that's just part of how it was. 12 o'clock, another set of terrorists come in further down the gate again. This time, 2 of them go into Benny and Sippy's house. Now, Benny is a 78-year-old man. He and his wife were in the safe room, but they heard the door smash, and for some reason, Benny went outside to see what it was. He came face to face with the terrorist. The terrorist shot him through the stomach. The bullet went out the other end. We joke in terms of the fact that the terrorist was scared of Benny, but what had happened was other soldiers had come outside, so they went out to fight. Benny says to Tzippi, his wife, you have to phone it in. Now, Tzippi had a stroke a couple of years ago, so her speech is slow, but she was still able to hold it all together. She phoned in, and the 3 men in the safe room knew that they had to send people in to get him out, because obviously he was bleeding. There was no way to get a car close to his house, because the kibbutz houses are very close together. But Tzippi has a special mobility scooter, and they literally put Benny on this mobility scooter and drove him out to the road where they could get him into a car. What I've forgotten to mention is that at one point, another member of our first response team, a wonderful guy called Ayal Young, excuse me a second, a big Spurs fan, he was shot multiple times, and he was also taken into Michaela's house. And Michaela tells this lovely story that he's lying next to Amichai, and she's taking care of them, and they're literally poking each other and saying to each other, you've got to stay alive, your wife needs you, your children need you. They're really helping each other. But it's very clear that they have to get out as quickly as possible. Now, no vehicles can get to us because the road has been captured by the terrorists. They were very sensible, the terrorists. They took hold of all the junctions. I also forgot to mention, I apologize, just before the terrorists came in, leading up to 7 o'clock in the morning, a son of our kibbutz, Nitai Amar, he drove out of the kibbutz to go back to his army base. He's a soldier serving in the engineering unit, and he literally drove smack into the terrorists. And another guy, and he was killed, and another guy called Rafi, who is in charge of the security in the whole area, he turned left out of the kibbutz and straight away saw somebody standing waving his arms in the air, and his arms were bleeding, and he stopped Rafi and he said, don't come any closer. That meant that there were terrorists there. And Rafi understood that if he had to get to where he needed to get to, he would have to go across the fields, but he also recognized that many of the Nova Festival were trying to escape. So he tried to get as many as possible to follow him. And he says to this day that he knows that maybe he rescued 30, 40 people, but he also knows that not everybody followed him. And that's his own personal trauma that he'll be living with, that he maybe could have saved more. And obviously he couldn't, he had to go, he had to get to work. So I take you back to Ayal and Amichai are in the house. Other members of the response team, they say we've got to get him out. The nurse is in touch with our doctor, who just happens to be deputy. He's in charge of the emergency room in Soroka Hospital in Beersheba. Crazily, they drive a car up to the front door. They schlep Ayal and Amichai. They lie them down in the back of the vehicle. And just like you see in the movies, they managed to drive out. They're being shot at while they're driving, but they managed to get him. They managed to get both of them to Netivot, which is our nearest city. Netivot, they moved over to an ambulance. From the ambulance to the hospital, and certainly for Ayal, it was definitely a case of life and death, and it may be seconds, minutes longer. I don't even want to think what could have happened, but thank God a million times he's okay. Amichai is okay. Iran, who I said before had been shot 3 times. When Benny was taken to hospital, Iran also agreed to go to hospital. And at about 2 in the afternoon, paratroopers came into our kibbutz. This was kind of like the first time that we felt that the army had arrived, so to speak. These were also the soldiers who'd been, there were 2 helicopters that landed in our field, and possibly you read about that as the last soldier got off, the terrorists shot an RPG through the helicopter and blew it up. So again, miracle, luck, fate. Seconds, it would have been a very different story. These soldiers came in, and while we're in the room throughout the day, we're getting messages constantly from our team. We have a special team that have been trained to keep in contact with us, that they know what to do. We know that information is vital, and to know that all the time we should know what's going on. For us in the room, we were, most of the time, I have to say, we did use our bathrooms. I learned afterwards many families didn't step out of their safe room, and they used a drawer, became their bathroom. I heard about adults even who used nappies because that was the only thing that they could do. As I say, was on the phone most of the day. A lot of parents from the Nova Festival were phoning me to find out where their children were, which was a whole new experience for me because I didn't know what I could tell them. I was trying to find out myself what to tell them. One father phoned me, and he was on the phone, on his other phone, to his son who had tried to escape and was injured, and he was looking after somebody else injured, and they'd locked themselves in a bathroom in a petrol station. And could I send the cavalry, so to speak? When I spoke to the army, they said to me, "Oh my God, Esther, forget it. We can't get to him. Just tell his father to keep him talking. They should stay quiet, maybe just messages." That's all we could do. So we were feeling fairly helpless as well while all of this was going on. And during the course of the day, we're learning about people in our kibbutz who've been injured. By the time Shabbat goes out, we now know much more of what's gone on everywhere else. We later discovered that there were two units, special units, Shaldag and Matzada, who were on their way actually to Kfar Aza or Nachal Oz, and they were sent messages telling them there's 3 more truckloads of terrorists on their way to Alumim. Don't let what happened in Alumim, don't let what happened in Be'eri or Nachal Oz happen in Alumim. They fought them off. A very famous soldier, the Shaldag unit, was the first time they lost anybody. A soldier called Credo, he was killed in the process, and they lost a few others. The Matzada unit, which is a special unit from the prison services here, that I didn't even know they had their own special unit, and each member of their brigade, they all look like Arnold Schwarzenegger from way back. They're incredible. There were 2 amazing brothers, Slutkin brothers from Beersheba, who just literally picked up their guns, got in a car, drove here. They lost their lives just outside kibbutz. And we also, Alumim, as well as losing Nitai, we lost Shachar Bergstein, who is another son of kibbutz. He lives in Kfar Aza, and he was killed straight out. And later on during the war, we also lost Uriah Mash, who's a 42-year-old man who didn't need to go to Miluim, didn't need to go to the war, but he volunteered, and he was killed. And I'm sorry to say that in addition to all of that, I lost my husband as well, Stevie, who I mentioned before, camp's organizer. We had been evacuated the following day. On Shabbat, they told us we were going to be evacuated. Eventually, on Sunday, we were evacuated. In the morning, he went down to the Refet. He saw the bodies of the Thailandian Nepalese workers. He saw the damage that had been done. 10 cows had been shot. The cows, it was a massacre. The Thailandian workers that was just an awful sight to see. And although we left on the Sunday, the 8th of October, very quickly we had to talk about putting things together, and the Refet, the cows, would be the first that needed to be taken care of. So within a few days already, he was back on kibbutz, and just working like crazy. The cows already by this stage had diseases, they hadn't been fed, they hadn't been milked, and it was a huge task ahead to put it back together again. And unfortunately, on the 4th night of Hanukkah, he had a cardiac arrest and he died. So from our point of view, that's also the impact, obviously, extremely personal to me and my kids. My son, as soon as we came out of the safe room, he was called into Miluim, into Gaza. My son-in-law was straight away called into Miluim. And now my son's been called in again. And actually, my daughter got called in. I haven't even told Sarah Jane that piece of news. My 27-year-old daughter's also been called up for Miluim. So we're all being affected tremendously by what's been going on. On the 8th of October, Kibbutz Alumim were evacuated to Netanya, to 2 hotels. And then we began coping and dealing with new challenges. It's one thing going through that day where you're literally faced with death, which is obviously enormous. We learn about what's happening in the other kibbutzim, so very much is it okay to talk about it or not? We've survived, they haven't. There was much more damage there. There was also damage here. Is it okay? A lot of questions, and a huge, you can only imagine how much anxiety this would have been caused, especially after years where we've been told everything's okay and we know what we're supposed to do to keep ourselves safe. And then life in the hotels brought new challenges where we have families living together in one room. If you can imagine now yourselves, your children, all your children are families here with 7, 8 kids, all stuffed together in one bedroom. It's just incredible to try and picture something like that. Plus, because it's a hotel, they tell you when the meals are, they tell you what food. Very quickly, people who'd already felt that they lost control of their lives, even more so, felt that they lost control of their lives. And we were surrounded by incredible people, social workers, and the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Welfare all stepped up, and everybody wanted to help. But it was extremely overwhelming. And also, people started bringing packages because, and this I have to say, I remember B'nai Akiva 100 years ago, that tochnit where they say to you, if your house goes on fire, what would you take with you? What are the three things? And everybody always says their photo albums, their candlesticks. Well, in real life, it really wasn't like that. For sure it wasn't like that. I took my toothbrush, underwear, changed jeans, and off we went. I have friends from Kfar Aza who left with absolutely nothing. What I didn't mention is that I worked for 12 years in Nachal Oz and in other kibbutzim in the area. So I also know the victims, and I know people who've taken hostages and have lost friends along the way. So in the hotel, it was pandemonium in the beginning, chaos in the beginning. Good people like Sarah Jane, who's in charge of the kibbutz, sat down very quickly to start putting things together to try and get what we know and how the kibbutz functions here to function also in the hotels. That meant opening a school, making sure we have a kindergarten, making sure there are medical services. Now, these things took a bit of time, but we got there. And I think compared to other kibbutzim, Alumim did it very, very quickly. As far as my work is concerned with the resilience centers, half of our communities were evacuated throughout the whole of the country. Within the first 3 weeks, we set up 11 resilience centers, and we went from being a team of 17 therapists to a team of 190 therapists. So again, that's just to understand and appreciate what we're dealing with here as far as mental health and well-being. And basically, we use a lot of mottos along the way, is helping people bear the unbearable. And what resilience is all about is showing people that they can cope, they do have the ability, and we have to help them find what helps them keep going. And we're still in a state of keep going because, and I'm going to pass it back now to Sarah Jane, the plan is to come back to kibbutz Alumim. Alumim does have houses, and the agriculture has started functioning again. Again, thanks very much to volunteers. And with all the evil that we saw on that day, we've also seen a huge amount of goodness of people just stepping up, giving and doing, and really pushing forward, and really like rooting for us. And I haven't even said thank you for the fact that you've organized this Zoom, and it's really important for us that we know that there are people out there who got our back and really take interest and say, Yalla, we're going to come out and we're going to visit. We have already a few families have come back to live in Alumim. It's mostly the older people, and there are some people who are just not sure, and right now they're asking for another year. They don't know if they'll come back. Huge dilemmas has caused a lot of splits even within families, where maybe the father, the husband, doesn't want to come back and the wife does. Maybe the parents do and the children don't. We've seen it in the other moshavim and kibbutzim that they've come back, that for many people to walk through the door is re-traumatization all over again. So again, more therapy is needed. We're constantly working literally around the clock to try and take care of people and keep building, helping people build their own resilience, family resilience, and community resilience. Does Israel need the diaspora more than the diaspora need Israel? That was always one of the things that we talked about. And even though we just celebrated the Independence Day, we're also talking in terms of us all being interdependent now. Yes, we are definitely dependent on you and your support. And hopefully you're also dependent on us we have to work together. We have to recognize that we're all connected to people. There's lots of programs and projects. And Alumim definitely needs to have support, and not even necessarily financial support, just to know that we're all together in this and working through it together. And that's a huge part of helping us with our resilience and potentially, I think, building your resilience as well with your communities. And as Sarah Jane said, you have to ask, or you're being faced with those questions: Zionism, Judaism, and to see what's going on in the streets of London is really, really frightening. And we want to be able to help you and your communities deal with that as well. As an educational program, as you said before, Abby, when you hear the story from people who've experienced it, it's very, very important, for us as testimony, and it's very important for us to have an audience. We have to own our story, and we need people to hear it. There are many, many parallels that have been talked about, like with the Holocaust, and I think with us the narrative went from the Holocaust to the pogroms as well. But again, part of being who we are, the Jewish people, is telling that story, owning the story, retelling it, and also learning from it. And a huge part of our work in resilience is also acknowledging our emotions, and how we've been affected by everything, and how we're coping, and how we're going to carry on. And also appreciating that, yes, we are victims. Nobody wants to be a victim, but we are victims. But we can decide how we're going to behave as a victim. And that's what resilience is all about as well. And Alumim, as victims, have decided to move on, to keep going, to be able to cope with the loss, the sadness, the grief, but keep going. That's what this is about.